NEOS needed some technologies that Flow doesn't bring itself. And obviously TypoScript is something known in the Typo3 world, so we wanted to have something like TypoScript in NEOS too. We had a first implementation of the new TypoScript already since years actually, but it didn't feel flexible enough for our needs. So there was a rewrite, and now we have a new TypoScript 2.0, and I guess it will stay that way. And additionally, EEL was added as a technology to that. I will explain what both are about and what they are for. And as we build them as separate packages and very flexible, you can of course use both of them in Flow projects that are not using NEOS. And that's especially what I'm talking about. So we will start with a little TypoScript evolution. Just a quick story about TypoScript, the old TypoScript, the new TypoScript, why we wanted to improve on TypoScript, why we need TypoScript. Then we will look at the actual features of the TypoScript that we created. After that we take a look at EEL, what EEL is for and why we need it. And then I will discuss the use cases outside of NEOS. I must make the point already here that I don't have, unlike all or almost all of the talks before me, any great project ready that is done with exactly those technologies. So I can't demo anything, but I want to inspire you to use those technologies in your projects, and hopefully next year we have some results out of that. That would be nice. And lastly, some examples to get you started, some pointers to packages, demos, projects that at least start to use those technologies and give you some examples how to get going. So, TypoScript evolution. A little story. It is about a developer, a student, almost 10 years ago, and this student, he had worked with websites before and did a bit of programming, and he organized a big event together with other people, other students. It was a free time project, and this event needed a website, and it had 3 designs. We had a design student, he made 3 designs, and it had 2 languages, and each design could change day and night time. So it would be darker at night and more light at daytime, and it was like, wow, how would I realize such a website? So I thought, yeah, we need a CMS for that. And I'd never looked into CMSs at that point, and I checked out different CMSs like Joomla, Drupal, and Typo3. And Typo3 seemed nice somehow. I could already see there's potential in the flexibility of TypoScript and all that. But TypoScript was so confusing, it was huge, it had so much to offer, the reference is just confusing it at the first time. And still, it offered all the options I needed. I could see there's conditions, I could do a condition for day and night time and change the rendering. I could change, based on some parameters, the design of the website. So I could feel it could work out with that system. So, TypoScript in Typo3 CMS. The good parts are obviously the flexibility that it gives in Typo3 CMS. It just makes Typo3 what Typo3 is. Without TypoScript, you wouldn't be able to do a lot of the things that Typo3 is known for. You can access almost anything in your database, which is pretty nice, especially when you get started. If you don't have too much programming skills, you can quickly hack together something just to output data. Obviously, this is not a business case, but to get started, it's really nice to have that. You can use templates for all your output, also that is nice, and you can use it in your own extensions. But there are also some bad parts. The extensibility in TypoScript and CMS is quite bad. It is better now. You can hook into it, you can add data, custom data getters, but still it is not extensible really. Also the syntax has quite some problems. It has evolved over time, and you have some camel-cased options, some with underscore, so it's really difficult to get going and to remember all the options without looking into the reference. And it's just so many options that you can actually set in TypoScript. You will never be able to know all this from your mind. So that are the parts that we obviously wanted to improve in Neos. So, TypoScript in Neos. First, what we needed is flexible content rendering, obviously. That is what TypoScript is made for, and that is what we wanted to do with TypoScript in Neos. We wanted to have a more flexible way of rendering all the stuff that is in our content repository. I will not talk much about the content repository because it's not part of my talk. As I guess not many of you have used Neos, I will say a few words about the content repository later on, because also that one could be used outside of Neos, but it's actually not that important for this talk. Just remember, the content repository is a tree structure of your data, of pages, content, so you need some flexibility to render that. We use fluid templates, and we use fluid templates consistent everywhere in TypoScript. It's one of the building blocks of the new TypoScript to use fluid templates. This also allows us to maintain the same flexibility, but getting rid of a lot of options and configuration and standard parts that you usually needed in the TYPO3 CMS. Also, we just offer a very limited set of TypoScript objects in the new TypoScript. Actually, it's so limited that I just will list them and explain to you what they do, so you get an understanding of what are the capabilities of the TypoScript. There's a template. As I said, it's the building block. It just renders a fluid template. You give it a template path and assign it variables, and it will just render this template with the variables. Then there's an array. The array is, for all those that know TYPO3 CMS, it's the replacement for the COA. So it enables you to render a collection of other TypoScript objects together and use the output at some place. Then we have a collection. The collection iterates over a set of objects, and these objects in Neos, they are usually nodes, so it's, for example, all your content elements. You iterate over all content elements and render them one by one. But actually TypoScript doesn't need a node in a collection. You can also put your domain models in there and render domain model by domain model. Then there's the case object. That's also important, of course. You need to make decisions about your rendering. So the case object is working a bit different than in TYPO3 CMS, but still the functionality is pretty clear. You define some different render paths based on conditions, and at runtime, TypoScript will decide which rendering path to use. And lastly, there's a value object. Very simple. It's maybe comparable to the text TypoScript object in TYPO3 CMS. It will just output some content. Whatever you put in, it will get output. So in case you don't need a template because you just output a title, for example, you can use the value object. So that are all the basic TypoScript objects in the TypoScript package. Neos defines a few more objects, like a menu, for example, but obviously a menu is specific to the nodes in Neos. So it's not in the basic TypoScript package. Also, for example, you might be missing a page object that is the starting point for every website in TyPO3 CMS. But actually, as we don't treat a page as something special, a page object is defined in Neos, but it's just a template again. We have a default page template, so you can change all the doc type and HTML tag information directly in your Fluid template. So that's also not part of the TypoScript package. And then another thing is that we wanted to make it very, very easy to override things in TypoScript, in the new TypoScript. If you ever tried to override the title rendering in the old TypoScript for like 3 different columns, you will get crazy because you copy the default out, change something and copy it back into the content on a specific path. It's very complicated. We work with a more flexible system, and you can override any basic object at any point in the TypoScript hierarchy, and it will just work inside that part of TypoScript. And lastly, we need some replacement for standard wrap. Actually, standard wrap is used a lot in TYPO3 CMS, but it's also used too much and doing way too many things that probably shouldn't be done in a configuration language. So we have processors, and the processors can change the values of your TypoScript. They are a bit like standard wrap, but in a way more flexible. This is a little example for how the application of such a processor might look like in the new TypoScript. So we have some title property somewhere, and you apply a processor. This is the sign for I want to apply a processor to that. You can number them. That's the order the processors get executed. So you're not on a fixed order of processors. You can rearrange them as you like. You can use the same processor multiple times. There's no problem. And this is, for example, a simple wrap processor that prefixes and suffixes the content of your title with something. Yeah.
What happens if I use the number 1 again?
Then you override it actually. Okay. So you can, at any later point, you can override the processors. Of course, you can spread it. I mean, you don't need to do 1, 2, 3. You can also, like in TypoScript CMS, do 10, 20, 30 if you want to leave some spare room. But it is specifically made to be open to overwriting the processes used at some later point. So what can I actually use TypoScript for? And as I said, I don't have a great example application here. Actually, I have made, because I had exactly that problem. I said, I was sitting in the train coming here, and I had the talk prepared, and I thought, well, okay, the information is there, but somehow I need to show people that it's actually working in some way. So I started a very basic application that uses TypoScript as the view configuration language for this application. But it's really just a flow application. It doesn't use any Neos besides the TypoScript package. And this application is really not cleaned up at all. I'm using some examples later in the slides, but if we have time I can quickly demo it and show you the actual TypoScript. It's totally not cleaned up right now, it's just my playground to show you something. But of course I will make it public, and you can check it out if you want to try TypoScript in your own packages. So what we need is making your rendering flexible. That is one of the options that TypoScript allows you to do. Currently in flow applications you have a very clear combination of controller action and the template that is rendered for this controller action. Of course you can override it in your controller, but it's not really flexible. We have a change pending that will change that and allow you some more flexibility to configure the template used in your flow controller action. But still, if you have a big application and need a lot of flexibility for the rendering, for adding modules later on in your rendering, for hooking in, at that point you might want to consider using TypoScript instead of the Fluid. And TypoScript is actually just a view. So you just configure your controller to use the TypoScript view, and from that point on you can use TypoScript instead of the default Fluid template. Also, something that came to my mind would be generators. If you need to generate configuration files, code, whatever, TypoScript might be something you can look at, because you can very easily configure and change the configuration for the output of whatever you want to generate in a very flexible way. And of course, output of unknown data. So if you have data sets that you don't know the structure of, think document databases, structureless information you get from web services, TypoScript can enable you to render them in some meaningful way depending on the properties you get before knowing what you get. So what can you do with TypoScript besides the default implementation stuff that we offer you? First of all, you can implement custom TypoScript objects, something that is very difficult in TYPO3 CMS. If you want to add a new TypoScript object, it's never a first-class citizen anyway, and it's complicated. For us, every TypoScript object is just configured in TypoScript, and you assign it a PHP implementation class, and whatever you want to do, you just implement your PHP class that does the thing, and you have a new TypoScript object. You can also copy from existing TypoScript objects, like the template, what we do in the page. So it's really easy to create new TypoScript objects, and we do it a lot actually in the examples and in Neos itself. So this is a screenshot of my little demo application. It is bound to become a shop at some time if it's grown up. But for now it can just display shop categories. So I have just 2 top categories with some sub-levels, and this top menu here is actually a new TypoScript object that I implemented quickly. So it takes your domain data, it's a category domain model, very simple, with child nodes, not child nodes, but child objects obviously, and it renders that in some meaningful way for you. So that's the implementation. There's a bit missing, but it's not much more. It's really fast to implement such a thing. As I said, it's not cleaned up yet, but I will upload it to GitHub and share the link with you. Then obviously you can also extend the processors. If you have need of processors, actually we implemented the feature, but we don't use them that much in Neos. But depending on your use case, you might use processors a lot. You can implement new processors. They just need to stick to the processor interface, and you can use them in your TypoScript. Also, this is an existing processor, but it's also not a lot of code you need to do to create your own custom processor here. So now we have TypoScript. You have flexible views. You can configure that. You can use the TypoScript view in your flow package. That's really easy. We are done, right? I mean, what else would you want to do? Well, yeah, if you think about it, some things are missing. So for those missing parts, we implemented the embedded expression language. Actually, Christopher did that mostly. Really great work, because it was the missing bit that we had in TypoScript. So what is EEL? EEL is a domain-specific language. It is specifically made to work on objects and collections, and it's based on the parsing expression grammar. Very interesting if you need to implement the domain-specific language yourself. You can check that project out. But wait, why would I want EELs in my code? Why should I do that? I have my TypoScript and I'm happy with it. At least in Neos you will quickly find out, no, I'm not happy with just having TypoScript. And for my demo application, I just started with TypoScript and I quickly found out, well, I also need EEL in my demo application. So EEL offers you a jQuery-like syntax. to access collections and to do traversal on those collections and objects that you have. And this is obviously the missing part in TypoScript, because in TypoScript you configure your view, and seeing it in Neos, you get some page that you are rendering, but now you need to do a lot of things with collections. You need to gather the content elements on that page, you need to traverse to other parts of your website, you need to build a breadcrumb, which is basically a traversal to the root node. So there are lots of places where you need traversal in TypoScript. And this is what EEL offers. It was made to be used inside TypoScript, but also it's a separate package and it can be used separately. You can access the EEL parser directly in your code, in your PHP code, and render something directly from a EEL expression that you configured somewhere. I also have an example for that later. So what do I use EEL for? You access objects, that's the very basic stuff. This is actually just, this is TypoScript with EEL inside, and it's just telling TypoScript basically, here comes an EEL expression. And what I do is I access some top level category. What you need to know to understand that is that TypoScript has a context that it's working with. In Neos, this context is the current node you're rendering, so your page. And from that page on, you can access that page and you can traverse to other parts in your website. But in your own application, this is an example from my little shop application, I can put anything in the context. And as I already told you, TypoScript is just a view as the fluid view. So it behaves the same in your PHP code. In your controller, you just assign variables to the view as you would for your fluid view. And those variables are accessible in the TypoScript context. And that's what I'm doing here. I actually have a view variable called top level category. This is really a category domain object. And I can directly access this top level category through EEL in my TypoScript configuration. So that's pretty easy. Another example is this one. This is one of the examples where the EEL is used standalone outside of TypoScript. It's from the new views configuration that's still under review, but the example would work when you use it with EEL together. And the idea is that here we put as a context not a collection of different objects, but just one object. And we can access methods on this object. So in our EEL context, while accessing this EEL expression, we have one object that implements a method isPackage, and we just ask it, isPackage TYPO3 flow. It will give back a boolean true false. Same here, we ask it, is the controller views configuration test C? It will answer boolean true false. And then you can do boolean AND with EEL actually. So EEL will in the end give you the true false for this expression. And that makes it really flexible. You can use such examples in your own configuration files if you need to. You can create custom configurations and do stuff like that. You can use that in a backend context and ask users to implement some queries if they want to. So you can really put anything into this context and work on that. It supports also access, so you can also access properties of the objects you have in your context. It's basically the same as in Fluid, so you can access sub-properties. So that gives you a lot of flexibility without knowing before what kind of object exactly will be in your context. Then there are the operations. Actually, to be precise, but that would be too long for this talk, EEL consists of different parts. There's EEL and there's inside a flow query. So the operations are actually part of flow query. And you will see the difference because here I need to tell it, okay, I will want to use a flow query on this object. The flow query is just a kind of wrapper, so EEL knows what to expect. If I wrap any object with the flow query, I know, okay, or EEL knows, okay, I have a flow query object, a collection, and I know what I can do with this. So I can call special operations that are implemented on these collections. And here, for example, I call a children operation, and I just give it the property the children are in. So I have my category, that's the domain model I implemented. It has a property children. In there are the child categories, and with the EEL operations I can just ask for all the children that are in this property. Obviously EEL cannot know the property children are in, because you could have multiple properties that have some child collection inside. So you have to define that here. There's a few more operations, but I don't want to go through over all of them. You can check them out and use that also in your application. Then you can do comparisons. You already saw that in the first example. This is another example for a comparison. Here I get all the children and then do a count operation on that one. It's also a flow query operation, so it works on everything. And I just ask you, if is the count greater than 0, then do something. So that works nicely together with TypoScript. If I use my case object in TypoScript, I need to set some condition for all my cases, and this could be one of the conditions. If I have child categories, I do something else in my rendering. Also, I can filter objects, and actually the example I will bring is, I didn't try it because I didn't have time, but in theory it should work that way. You can filter by properties of your domain model. So if you have a hidden property in your domain model, I have a collection of categories here, and I will filter them for all the categories that have hidden 0. Every other category is removed from the collection. So the remaining my categories are actually just the not hidden categories. So how do I extend EEL? I can add custom operations. There's the children operation. If you want a parent operation, you can implement that. I don't know, if you want something special as an operation for the collections, you're free to implement that. Some special filters, for example. And you can manipulate the context. That's something I talked about already. Basically, you can put in anything into the context. Doesn't need to be a collection, it can be a single object that you want to access in your specific EEL expression. Those are the two building blocks, and put together into one, you have a very powerful tool to work with your domain models, to access your domain models, and to dynamically change your views and rendering based on your domain models and properties. I think, for example, in such a shop, if it gets bigger, if you have more modules, it is the kind of project you want to consider TypoScript as a view configuration. As I said, there are not many existing examples, unfortunately. There is the views configuration where I took one of the examples from. It's still in view, but you can check it out on Garrett. I'm pretty sure it will be merged soonish, so from that point on you have a good pointer how to use EEL expressions, only EEL expressions, because it's directly using EEL from PHP. Then there's the TYPO3 expose package. That is a package that offers you a generic way of accessing domain models, kind of a CRUD basic controller, maybe similar to the list view in TYPO3 CMS. The package is under development, but it's available publicly, and there we use TypoScript to render to dynamically render the forms based on the annotations in your domain models, stuff like that. So the TypoScript there is already pretty complicated for starters, but maybe it's nice to have some more example. Then is the corner shop demo package, yeah, as I said, it's not yet uploaded because I need to clean the code. Otherwise, you will all produce messy code, which I don't want to. And lastly, this is strictly not TypoScript and EEL outside of Neo's example, but the plugin block that Robert made uses actually the TYPO3 CR to store blog posts and comments to the blog posts in the TYPO3 content repository. It still uses Neos because it renders the blog posts inside the Neos website, and you use the Neos backend to edit the blog posts. But of course it uses TypoScript in that context, and it is a good pointer on how to understand the TypoScript CR and how to use those nodes for other kinds than just the typical Neos pages and content elements. And you could, at any point, take the TypoScript CR and implement your own node types and do something like the blog package separately from Neos. Of course, then you need also implement a user interface to edit those things. But still, it gives you all the options of the node tree that you have with the TypoScript CR, and TypoScript and EEL are really made for this this kind of environment. So you can also use all three together and still not use Neos. Okay, let's put that all together. We have TypoScript. You can use it separately. If you install it, you are able to define it as a view in your controller. You assign it variables that will be available as context. That's important that you remember what the context is in that area. Inside your TypoScript, and in your TypoScript object implementations, you can obviously access the context and put new stuff in the context or remove stuff from the context and manipulate the context in any way you want. So you use it for modular and flexible renderings. If you feel the need of having more flexibility in your output, look at TypoScript. It might solve some of your problems. The other point is rendering of unknown data. If you're dealing with views that you don't know exactly before how they might look like, if the data is changing a lot, you also might want to consider looking into TypoScript to have a more flexible way of doing that. And then there's the embedded expression language, a domain-specific language for working with contexts and objects inside that context. You have the object access. You can deeply go into your object hierarchy. You can use the operations, and you can use it for dynamic configurations, as we do it in the views configuration. So anytime you need to configure something that needs to adapt at runtime, basically, you can consider EEL. And use it standalone. Yeah, so that are the technologies. I hope I try to don't do it too technically. Obviously, they are technologies, so I need to do a bit of code examples and technology explanation. But I hope you understood what EEL and TypoScript are made for, and maybe you are inspired now to try them in your project if your project applies to one of the use cases I told you about. And I would be amazed to see how you use those technologies, maybe next year. Okay, that's about it. I guess as we have a bit of time, I will quickly show you the demo shop. As I said, it's not much, but so you get an idea of how it works. So you saw that already. This is the shop homepage, and we see the menu here. I made a little example of the traversal options in TypoScript and EEL. So you see here I come from TypoScript food. This is the name of a subcategory that is under survival because you need food to survive. I just remember this example when I show you the TypoScript, because then you can see how nicely I traverse the category models to access this subcategory. Yeah, this is the menu I explained already. It's based on a custom PHP implementation to render that. I can click obviously. Here I'm in the subcategory, here I'm outputting the category name. I have a breadcrumb, which is also generated from TypoScript. And I change the view a bit depending if I have child categories or not. If I'm in a leaf category, I will just display the information that I'm in a leaf category. Obviously you would want to do something else here. This is a different template, just for example. But maybe you would want to remove the column totally and just render your products in 4 columns or something. If you're not in a leaf category, you will have a submenu of the categories below the current category in that column. Let's look at the package quickly. This is our TypoScript. What I'm doing here is just including all the TypoScript objects that are coming from the TypoScript package. We do that in Neos too, but of course we can also create a little include file, which we didn't do so far because there was no need for it. And then I define all my TypoScript objects. I won't go over everything here, just to show you some examples. This is my category, the food on the home page I output. So I'm accessing the top level category that is actually given from the controller, because I need some starting point for my hierarchy to traverse it. I get the children of the children, and get the first one of those children and output the property name, and that's just food. Also for the breadcrumb, that's not that nice because it works better in Neos. We don't have the right implementation yet for domain models, but it's pretty easy to do that. And if the need comes up, I guess we will implement that. For now, I'm just using the active category that I also get from the controller. And this is, remember, this is a flow query, so it's always a collection. So I can use an operation to add something to that collection, and I add the children. The children here, it's a bit special because I use the children operation, but I actually give it the name of the parent property. So it will actually fetch the parent property. It's a bit confusing because we don't have the right implementation to fetch parents. That's something that we miss for the main models. But it works. So it's added on top, and so I have a list of my categories from the current category up to the root category, and I use that to render my breadcrumb in a fluid template where I just use for each. So that's pretty simple. You see here's my corner shop menu. I give it a root category, the active category, so it can define the states. I don't give it a template because I set a default template in the PHP implementation. And if you just quickly look into the classes, you will see there is a domain model category. That's really just a basic flow domain model that I use in my EEL and TypoScript. You don't need to do anything special to use it. It's really plain PHP and flow. In the controller, that is really empty, because anything I do is just fetch the top level category and assign it to the view. Index action does nothing basically, because I get everything in TypoScript, and the view category action gets the actual category that I clicked on and assigns it to the view. That's it. Here I define obviously the default view object name to this TypoScript view. That's the important part. That's everything PHP wise. Everything else is done with TypoScript and EEL. So, there is the missing slide from the beginning. That's Kitsunet is my Twitter nick. Follow me please if you want to, if you're interested in more of this EEL stuff and all this TypoScript craziness. I thank you for listening, and do you have any questions? Yes?
Not related to the topic, but what does Kitsunet mean?
Yeah, okay. When I was that sad student from the little story I told, I actually, while I implemented this CMS website I talked about, I was living 1 year in Japan. And Kitsune is the Japanese name of the red fox, and I just liked the word and made a little word play on it and added the T, so it's net to signify I'm doing something with websites and nets. So Kitsunet originated from that originally, and as Kitsunet is already taken on Twitter, I added the German article das. Okay, any other questions? Remarks on that? Yeah? No. Well, the template, the template is... Sorry, yes, of course. Does the template object offer some caching? And to be precise, the template object is a fluid template, so it is cached as any fluid template, but the TypoScript view itself doesn't have any caching right now. Obviously that's something we want to implement, but currently it's parsed on every request and executed. But TypoScript is from the implementation very lightweight. It just obviously everything is parsed, but the rendering is just using the parts that you use. If you don't use the TypoScript object, it's not accessed, and the PHP class is not loaded and not instanced. So that's okay. Also for EEL, as far as I know, the same EEL query won't be executed twice. That's cached. So in the same request, if you use the... It won't be compiled, but executed. Okay. Yeah, okay. Yeah, so, yes. Yeah?
Can we do crazy things like call another controller with another action? Repeat the question.
Yes, the question was if we can do crazy things like accessing or calling a controller action. Yes, with the plugin implementation. The plugin implementation is made for NIRS, but from a technical perspective, I don't see any reason why you couldn't use the plugin implementation directly in TypoScript and use it to render some control action. It's not tested, and probably there will be some problems with it, but it should work, and I guess we can make it work.
But it would be crazy.
It would be crazy, definitely, yes. And I want to add some little thing myself now. What we do to combine fluid templates and TypoScript is we have a TypoScript render view helper that you can call in fluid to render a specific path in your TypoScript. For example, the menu I defined, obviously I need to define at which place it will be rendered, so I can call the render TypoScript view helper in my fluid template and render just the menu at this place. The render TypoScript view helper needs already instantiated TypoScript to work. There's also a pending change that will allow you to run the TypoScript render view helper in a plain fluid template. So not a fluid template that is coming from TypoScript, but if you in your controller actually don't use a TypoScript view but a plain fluid view, that you are able to render just a snippet of TypoScript inside this fluid view. It is, it's pretty complicated, but it works, and it also makes sense, because if you want to combine your flow application, you have a huge flow application that you don't want to make plugins of for Neos, but still you need Neos for some content, and you need a menu of Neos in your flow application, you have a problem. And for such use cases, the render view helper should work in a fluid view, because then you can just render your Neos menu inside your normal fluid application. Okay, more questions? Seems not. So I say thank you for listening. Hope you enjoyed it, and thank you.